Hello, friends. In this episode, we'll be listening to the story of Vivian James and her daughter, Scarlett. Grab a cup of coffee and get ready to dive into this delightful tale. Enjoy the show. The spoiled alien princess made fun of the human man, but her mother stopped her. "He's your father." The palace of Aurelaith did not sit upon the ground, for it despised the ground the way the very rich despise anything free. Instead, it drifted 3 leagues above a violet ocean of clouds, held aloft by gravity wells so ancient that even the engineers who tended them prayed to them a little, just in case. Its halls were carved from singing marble, its windows from glass that hummed when the 3 moons rose, and through it all walked servants who had perfected the art of bowing while walking backward without falling to their deaths. In the great throne room, beneath a ceiling painted with the map of 100 conquered stars, the Princess Scarlett was bored. This was, for Scarlett, a natural and permanent condition, like the weather. She lounged sideways across her lesser throne, her sapphire skin catching the moonlight, her long ears, elegant, tapered, the pride of her bloodline, twitching at every dull word of court business. She had already yawned 9 times. She was counting, because counting yawns was more interesting than the yawn's cause. Then the doors groaned open, and the guards dragged in something so entertaining that Scarlett actually sat up. It was a human. A real one, ragged and worn, in a coat that appeared to have survived several wars and lost every single one of them. His hands were rough and cracked, the hands of a creature that fixed things instead of ordering others to fix them. His eyes were soft and brown and tired in a way that Scarlett, who had never been tired a day in her pampered life, found deeply amusing. "Oh, marvelous," she announced to the court, gesturing at him like a merchant showing off a stain. "Mother, look what the gravity tide dragged up. Is it broken?" "It looks broken. Someone check if it came with a warranty." The court laughed, because the court always laughed when she wished it to. This was one of the few reliable pleasures of being a princess. Encouraged, she rose and circled him. "Look at this coat. My tailors would faint. My tailors would demand hazard pay." She leaned close, wrinkling her nose theatrically. "And it smells. It smells like a fuel line in regret. Tell me, creature, do all humans arrive pre-ruined, or is this a special edition?" More laughter. She was warming up now, glancing toward the great throne where her mother sat, waiting for the Empress to smile, because her mother always smiled at her cleverness, always. It was practically a law of the universe. "He probably crawled up here hoping for scraps," Scarlett went on, warming to her audience. "Go on, human. Say something in that grunting little tongue of yours. Beg. It's what you're built for." "Scarlett." The voice was quiet. It was not the quiet of calm. It was the quiet of something enormous, holding very still. The Empress Vivian had risen from her throne. She rose the way a tower falls in slow motion, with terrible, unstoppable grace. And her face, that magnificent sapphire face the whole empire feared and adored, had gone pale. Not with anger. Scarlett knew anger. Anger was familiar, comfortable, survivable. This was something the girl had never once seen on her mother, and it froze the laughter solid in her throat. "You will not," Vivian said, and her voice trembled. "Speak to him that way." The court held its breath. Scarlett looked from her mother to the ragged man, utterly lost. Why not? He's nobody. He is your father." The 3 moons hummed on, indifferent. And the human, at last, lifted his tired brown eyes. 4 words, and the throne room came apart like a badly tightened bolt. Scarlett did what any dignified princess would do when informed her entire understanding of her origins was a lie. She demanded a second opinion. "No," she said. "No, absolutely not. There has been a filing error. Someone has mislabeled a human. I want a scan. I want 3 scans. I want the good scanner. Not the one that keeps insisting the ambassador from Threll is technically a fungus." The palace physician was summoned, a fussy little scholar named Theodore who arrived clutching his diagnostic wand and the permanent expression of a man expecting bad news at all times. He waved the wand over James, then over Scarlett, then over James again, muttering to the instrument as though it might apologize. A soft chime rang out. Theodore read the result, blinked, read it a second time, and then sat down very suddenly on a step that was not intended for sitting. "The genetic markers," he said faintly, "are a match. 99.96% paternal concordance. I would like some water, or possibly a new profession." "That's impossible," Scarlett insisted, though her voice had lost its edge and picked up a wobble. "Look at him. Look at me. I glow. He looks like something that fell off a cargo hauler." "You do have his stubbornness," Vivian murmured, which helped no one. James, for his part, had been standing through all of this with the quiet patience of a man who had waited far too long to be rushed now. Someone, in a fit of belated hospitality, decided he ought to sit and guided him toward a seat of honor near the dais. This was a mistake. The seat of honor was not, in fact, a chair. It was a ceremonial hover throne, a delicate anti-gravity relic that responded to the slightest shift in weight. James lowered himself into it. The throne registered an unauthorized human, and it rose smoothly toward the ceiling with him aboard, spinning gently. "Ah," James said, gripping the armrests as 3 moons wheeled past the window. Yep, okay, this is happening." "Do not touch anything," Theodore shrieked. "I'm not touching anything. It's touching me." 2 guards leapt to intercept. A decorative pike got knocked loose, and for a glorious moment the most solemn court in the Empire dissolved into the spectacle of 4 grown warriors trying to catch a slowly orbiting human before he crashed into a priceless star map. He was eventually retrieved, deposited on solid marble, and handed a cup of ceremonial wine that he drank in one grateful gulp, then quietly wheezed because it was roughly 900 years strong. And through the chaos, Scarlett watched the 2 of them, because that was the thing she couldn't laugh away. Amid all the absurdity, her mother had not laughed once. Vivian, who ruled 100 stars, who had never in Scarlett's memory shown a crack, could not seem to look directly at the ragged human, and yet could not stop stealing glances at him either, the way one looks at a wound to check if it still hurts. And James looked back at Vivian with an expression Scarlett had no name for, something patient and broken and hopeful all at once. The court dispersed in murmurs. The princess remained, standing in the vast, emptying hall between her mother and this stranger who shared her blood, and understood, slowly, that the coldness she'd grown up inside, the distance in her mother, the silences at dinner, the doors that were always politely closed, had never been emptiness at all. It had been a locked room, and someone, all this time, had been standing on the other side of it. Long before there was a crown, or a court, or a princess bored enough to insult her own father, there was a broken ship and a woman who was too proud to admit she'd broken it. The trade station Kelevar hung at the edge of nowhere, a rusting ring of docks and noodle stalls where 100 species came to refuel and complain about the prices. Vivian had arrived there as a young imperial envoy, glittering and impatient, her sleek diplomatic cruiser wheezing into a berth with a sound no expensive ship should ever make. She had informed the dock authority with great dignity that her vessel required minor recalibration. The dock authority had informed her, with equal dignity, that her fusion coupling had melted into modern art. Enter James, younger then, though the coat was already ancient, a human mechanic who worked the outer berths and had opinions about people who mistook confidence for maintenance. "Well," he'd said, peering into her engine bay, "good news is it's fixable. Bad news is whoever tuned this last did it with their eyes closed and a grudge." "That was the finest engineer in the Imperial fleet," Vivian had said icily. "Then the Imperial fleet has my sympathies." She had hated him immediately, which is the traditional first step of most great romances. He fixed the coupling for free because, as he explained, he didn't have anything better to do, and she had a nice laugh. She had denied having a nice laugh. Then she'd laughed, ruining the argument entirely. He stayed to fix one more thing, then another, and somewhere around the 3rd invented malfunction, she stopped pretending the ship needed it. They ate at the noodle stall where he taught her that humans season food like they're trying to hurt it, and she taught him 3 swear words in the imperial tongue that he immediately used, badly, in front of a passing dignitary. They learned each other's silences on the observation deck, watching ships fold in and out of the void, 2 people from worlds so distant that their very biologies filed them under incompatible, deciding that the filing was wrong. It could have lasted forever. It nearly did. Then the summons came, old and cold, and stamped with the imperial seal. Vivian's mother had died. The throne was hers, and the throne did not negotiate. There was a law, ancient and unbending, that forbade a human consort at the heart of the empire, and there were those in the High Council who found the very idea of Vivian's little family an embarrassment to be quietly deleted. So they deleted it. While Vivian was away, drowning in the machinery of coronation, a faction of the council took the infant girl, sapphire-skinned, long-eared, impossibly small, and cast her into the care of a distant fostering world, scattering the trail across the stars so thoroughly that even an Empress could not follow it. Vivian was told the child had not survived the crossing. She was handed a folded cloth and a lie, and expected to rule. James was told nothing at all. He simply woke one morning on Kelevar to a message that had stopped arriving, a berth that stayed empty, and a cradle in their little quarters with no one in it. No explanation, no body, no goodbye. Only a silence that stretched into years. She grieved a daughter she believed dead. He grieved a family that had vanished into thin vacuum, uncertain whether it had been taken or had simply chosen to leave him behind. And so they spent a lifetime mourning in 2 different directions, one on a throne she never wanted, one in a coat that never warmed him, neither knowing that the child they wept for was, at that very moment, growing up spoiled, radiant, and utterly certain she had never been loved by anyone at all. They gave James a suite of rooms grand enough to house a small moon, and by the end of the first day he had managed to offend nearly every piece of furniture in it. The self-arranging closet refused to serve him after he called it pushy. The sonic wash chamber, upon reading his biology, kept insisting he was dangerously underhydrated and squirting him with mist whenever he walked past. He had taken to saluting it on his way out, which the machine seemed to find acceptable. The court, meanwhile, had appointed Scarlett to acclimate him. This was intended as a punishment for both of them, and it was working beautifully. "You do not hold the sipping bowl like that," she snapped, watching him drink from an heirloom vessel as though it were a mug. "You cradle it. 3 fingers. It's a 2,000-year-old artifact of the Serene dynasty." "It's a cup," James said. "It holds liquid. It has one job, and it's doing it." "It is a symbol. It's a symbol and a cup. Overachiever." He took another sip, deliberately wrong, watching her over the rim. "Does everything here have to mean something? Back home, a chair was a chair. You sat in it. It didn't rise to the ceiling and try to abduct you." Scarlett, against every instinct she had, felt the corner of her mouth twitch. She strangled it before it could become a smile. She tried to teach him to bow. He tried to teach her, in return, how to repair the air recycler in his suite, which had begun making a sound he described as a very small, very sad trumpet. He fixed it in 4 minutes with a hairpin borrowed from her hair, a length of wire, and a stubbornness that she found genuinely alarming. "You made that," she said, staring at the now silent vent. "With your hands. Like a servant. Like a person who wanted the trumpet to stop." He handed the hairpin back. "You've really never fixed anything?" "I have people for fixing." "You have people for everything." "Yes," she said, as though he'd finally understood something obvious. "That is the entire point of being me." He laughed, not the cruel court laughter she was used to summoning, but something warm and worn and real, and she didn't quite know what to do with it. She discovered, to her horror, that she had never in her life made her own breakfast, and James discovered this too, and refused to let it stand. He marched her to the palace kitchens, terrified an entire staff into evacuating, and set her in front of a heating plate and a bowl of grain mash with the gravity of a man defusing a bomb. She burned it, twice. The second time set off a fire suppression drone that doused them both in cold foam while chirping apologies. "That," James said, wiping foam from his eyes, "is the proudest I have ever been of anyone." And there, dripping, ridiculous, Scarlett laughed. A real one, unbidden, the spoiled armor slipping for just a moment. It was then that he told her quietly, that he remembered her laugh. That when she was small, before the stars took her, she had a laugh exactly like that, startled and bright, like she'd surprised herself with joy. He'd carried the sound across 30 years and 100 worlds, the one thing no one could take. And here it was again, alive, standing in front of him covered in foam. The princess, who always had a clever reply, found, for the first time, that she had none. And far above, unseen on a high gallery, a robed figure of the council watched the two of them laughing in the ruined kitchen, and did not laugh at all. Slowly, thoughtfully, the way one closes a hand around a problem, the figure turned and withdrew into the dark. The trouble with the human heir was that you couldn't simply misplace the whole family twice. The council faction that had scattered Scarlett across the stars all those years ago had grown comfortable in the meantime, fat on stolen influence, powerful in the shadowed committees where real decisions were made. A returned human father threatened to unspool every lie they'd knotted into the Empire's foundation. So they did what such people always do. They stopped trying to be subtle. The first attempt was almost polite. James returned to his suite to find that the airlock to his private observation balcony had been recalibrated, and that its safety overrides had quietly retired. He noticed only because the pushy closet, which had apparently forgiven him, flashed a warning light and refused to open the balcony door, sulking protectively across the threshold. "Huh," James said, studying the sabotaged panel. "Machines got better instincts than the council." The second attempt arrived at dinner, in the form of a cup of wine that shimmered a fraction too brightly. It was Scarlett who caught it. Scarlett, who had spent her whole life being served, who knew exactly how a proper vintage was supposed to catch the moonlight, and knew that this one caught it wrong. "Don't drink that," she said sharply, knocking it from his hand. It hissed where it struck the marble, eating a small, smoking hole in a 2,000-year-old floor tile. James looked at the hole. He looked at his daughter. "So the wine here is also trying to kill me. Wonderful. At least the recycler likes me now." "Someone is doing this," Scarlett said. And for the first time in her pampered life, her voice held no boredom, no cruelty, no performance, only a cold, sharpening focus. She had, quite without noticing, started paying attention to someone other than herself, and it turned out she was frighteningly good at it. The third attempt did not bother with poison. They were crossing one of the high transit galleries, a slender bridge of singing glass strung between two towers, held together by nothing but a gravity well humming beneath it. When the hum stopped, the floor simply forgot it was a floor. Gravity peeled sideways, the far anchor blowing out in a shower of sparks, and the whole gallery began to tilt them toward a 3-league drop into violet cloud. "Rail!" James roared, and they hit the glass banister together as the world went vertical. What followed was less a daring escape than a very loud argument conducted while falling. James, who understood broken machines the way Scarlett understood insults, spotted the emergency gravity anchor housing and screamed instructions. Scarlett, who had exactly one useful skill and had just watched him fix a vent with a hairpin, tore the ornamental pin from her hair and jammed it into the housing where he pointed. "That's not a repair," he shouted. "That's a suggestion. It's what I have." It worked. Barely. The gravity well caught with a shuddering groan. The gallery lurched level, and the two of them collapsed onto the glass, gasping, alive, having each just kept the other from becoming an interesting stain on the clouds. For a long moment, they only breathed. "You saved my life," James said. "You saved mine first." She stared at the ceiling. "I'm choosing to be furious about that." Across the palace, in her private chambers, Vivian received the report. The airlock, the wine, the gallery, and something in her sapphire face, a door that had stayed locked for 30 grieving years, finally, quietly, cracked open. She had lost this family once by staying silent. She rose, and this time she did not intend to lose them by staying silent again. Vivian summoned the full court the next morning, and the full court came expecting the usual, some minor ruling, a trade dispute, perhaps a tasteful execution. What they got instead was the truth, which no one in the palace had seen in so long that several older ministers didn't recognize it at first. She stood before them without her crown. That alone silenced the hall. An empress without her crown was like a star without its light, technically still there, but deeply, alarmingly wrong. 30 years ago, Vivian said, her voice steady and terrible, this court told me my daughter was dead. It was a lie. She was taken, by hands still in this room, and given to the stars, so that certain among you would never have to explain a human in the imperial line. Her sapphire gaze swept the gallery like a blade. I believe the lie because grief is easier to survive than fury. I do not intend to make that mistake a second time. The hall erupted, and from the eruption stepped the robed figure who had watched from the high gallery, Chancellor Adrian, the faction's patient architect, spreading his hands with the wounded calm of a man who has never once been caught. Majesty, he said smoothly, grief has clearly unbalanced you. Shall we discuss this privately before you say something the Empire cannot unhear? The Empire, James said from the foot of the dais, would love to hear it actually, loudly, with witnesses. Adrian's smile thinned. He gave a small, resigned nod, the nod of a man deciding to stop pretending, and somewhere below them, in the palace's ancient bones, a gravity well he had bribed and rigged and waited years to weaponize began to spin the wrong way. The floating palace shuddered. Then it began, very elegantly, to fall apart. Halls tilted. Glass sang and cracked. The great star map ceiling drifted loose from its own gravity and hung there, 100 conquered worlds floating gently sideways. Courtiers screamed and clung to whatever was bolted down, discovering too late which furniture was decorative and which was load-bearing. He's dumping the wells, James shouted over the groaning marble. The whole palace is going to lose its grip on the sky. Then we make it grip harder, Vivian said. What followed was the strangest imperial procession in the Empire's history, an empress, a mechanic, and a spoiled princess sprinting through a collapsing palace toward the central gravity core, while ministers fled the other way. James understood the machines. Vivian understood the ancient overrides only the imperial bloodline could speak to. And Scarlett understood how to insult a fleeing guard into dropping his access key, which turned out to be the single most useful contribution of the day. You're welcome, she panted, tossing the key to her father. I'm choosing to be furious about how good you are at that, James said, catching it. It runs in the family, apparently. They reached the core together, the three of them, as the palace tilted toward its violet grave. Vivian spoke the old words. James coaxed the failing wells with hands that had fixed 1,000 dying engines. And Scarlett, when the final anchor stuck fast, drove her ornamental hairpin into it one more time, because at this point it was practically tradition. The gravity wells caught. The palace groaned, steadied, and slowly, grudgingly, remembered that it was supposed to float. Adrian was found clinging with enormous dignity to a decorative pillar, which promptly detached and delivered him gently but firmly to the arms of the guards. And in the settling quiet, the three of them stood back to back in the humming core. Not a queen, a stranger, and a princess, but something far more dangerous to anyone who would try to break them again. A family, finally, that had chosen to stop falling. The trials of the faction were long, thorough, and, to the Empire's quiet delight, extremely public. Chancellor Adrian argued his own defense with the wounded eloquence of a man convinced the universe owed him an apology, right up until they played the recording of him rigging the gravity wells, at which point he requested, with great dignity, to be sentenced somewhere with a good view. He was granted a comfortable exile on a distant monitoring station, where he now files complaints about the food to an audience of no one. The old law forbidding a human consort was struck from the imperial codex entirely, unmade by the very court that had once killed a family to enforce it. The folded cloth Vivian had carried for 30 years. The lie she'd been handed in place of a daughter. She finally set down. The palace itself was repaired, though it kept a few honest scars. The tile James's poisoned wine had eaten through was left exactly as it was, at Scarlett's insistence, with a small engraved plaque beside it reading, "Here the wine tried and failed." Visiting dignitaries found this deeply confusing, which was precisely the point. And the closet forgave everyone. The wash chamber still insisted James was underhydrated. Some things, apparently, did not change, but Scarlett had. The girl who had once mocked a ragged stranger for the amusement of her court now spent her mornings in the palace kitchens, badly, joyfully, learning to make her own breakfast, a skill she had elevated from public hazard to merely concerning. She had discovered a genuine talent for repairing things, guided by a father who claimed she'd inherited it, though privately everyone agreed she'd mostly inherited the hairpin technique. She no longer performed cruelty for a laughing court. She had learned, slowly and against every instinct of her upbringing, that the more interesting thing was to make people laugh with her instead of at someone else. It turned out she was even better at that. It ran in the family. On the last evening of the story, the 3 moons rose over Aurelaith, and the singing glass hummed its old song, and the great throne room filled once more. The same marble, the same painted stars, the same hall where a bored princess had once laughed at the best thing that ever happened to her. But no one laughed at James now. He stood beside the throne in a new coat that he complained was too clean, his weathered hands folded, his soft brown eyes moving over the hall with the wonder of a man who had spent 30 years searching the dark and had finally, impossibly, arrived somewhere warm. Vivian descended from the dais without her crown. She wore it less and less these days, having discovered she preferred being a person to being a symbol, and crossed the vast marble floor that had once held a lifetime of silence between them. This time there was no silence to cross. She simply took his hand. His rough, cracked, engine-scarred hand closed around her sapphire one, and the two of them stood there, unhurried, as though making up for every year they'd been made to stand apart. Scarlett watched them from the steps, and at last understood the shape of the quiet she'd grown up inside. Not coldness, never coldness, but a locked room with 2 people grieving on either side of the door, and herself the key that had been lost between them. "You're staring," James said, without turning around. "I'm choosing to be furious about how happy you both look," Scarlett said. "It runs in the family," Vivian murmured. And so the story ended not with a war or a crown or a wedding, but with something rarer and far harder to break. A family reunited across the length of the stars, walking together toward the kitchens, arguing cheerfully about whose turn it was to burn the breakfast. Somewhere above the violet clouds, a family that the stars themselves had tried to erase now sits down each morning to burn their breakfast together, and perhaps that is the truest kind of victory there is. Not the toppling of a chancellor, not the mending of a palace, but 3 people who lost 30 years and chose, against all of it, to simply hold hands and begin again. And so we're left with the quiet questions this story presses gently into our chests. How many of the silences in our own homes are not coldness but locked rooms? Someone grieving on the other side of a door we never thought to open? How much of the distance we feel from the people we love is truly emptiness? And how much of it is only a truth waiting for someone brave enough to say it out loud? Scarlett spent her whole life certain she had never been loved, when in fact she had been loved so fiercely that an empire had to lie to hide it. What certainties are we clinging to right now that might dissolve the moment someone finally tells us the truth? Perhaps tonight is the night to open a door you've been walking past for years. Perhaps someone is standing on the other side of it, still waiting. The end. Our story ends here, friends. I hope you enjoyed it. As a reward for our efforts, please don't forget to hit the like button, leave your thoughts about the story in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.